So my speech starts in 3, 2, 1. Okay, so before I go on with my speech for this debate, first I would like to flag post what I would like to say. So first I would go to my key setup, then I will go on to my 4 arguments. Now, first things first, what I will be defining today's debate, and the biggest keyword here is big tech. What is big tech? So big tech is basically a large tech company that is in size and also its influence in economy and social influence, and also its leverage in the market. And it's usually consists of unified companies. All right. So now, what is our stance here for today's debate is that big tech companies, right? We want to break down these big tech companies to smaller subsidiaries, right? So they cannot be unified corporation or unified company, and these subsidiaries cannot link together to a parent company or something like that. So now I would like to give you the status quo for today's debate, which is firstly these massive companies, right? What is happening with these massive companies? They basically have too much power, and every time a new smaller independent company that pops up, they will take over and they will buy these smaller companies, which gives them too much money and power. And not only that, they can also lobby politicians. They can also control people's data and social media. Alright, so with that, I would like to tell you what our side here is what our side will prove for us to win this debate here today. Well, first we will explain to you why it is destroying the market for technology, for the technology market, why it's harmful for politics and also for countries, and why they keep getting bigger, which means they won't settle down after a while. Now, first things first, the biggest thing is that they will control the market. They will basically screw it over because they will no longer have competition after they keep buying these small indie or small technology companies, right? What do I mean by that? Well, simply, for example, like companies like Disney, where they are linked to so many smaller companies, and because of that, they have become too powerful and they have too much leverage, right? And why is this bad? Because when they take over companies that are smaller, more aspiring, and have quality, and they produce quality technology, for example, when these larger tech companies take control, what will happen is that they will water them down since they know they don't have competition, right? And this is basically a big problem, yeah.
Don't you think that if you were to break down these big companies, competition will happen less on your side of the house because of the fact that they no longer have any economic capital to begin with?
Economic capital? Well, okay. The thing is that when we break them down, I mean by instead of one big company that is hogging all of the economy here, and they are basically controlling everything. All of them are separated, right? They all have their own economy. They will have to compete with each other. These small parts, right? Instead of Disney controlling everything, we have like Marvel and National Geographic having their own part, right? So they have more competition because they have these parts, and at the same time, it's hard for us to believe that they no longer have the money to do anything if they are broken down, right? Because there's a reason why Disney bought them in the first place. It's because of how much quality they produce in the first place, right? But there are other points to that I will explain later. Now, the second part is a very big point on why these companies should be broken down, which is these big corporations or these big companies are not being held accountable. Now, what do I mean by that? Right? Basically, for example, Facebook steals information. For example, steals data. But nothing is changing no matter how much you fight it because they are linked to a parent company, right? So because of that, these parent companies are getting off scot-free because people are targeting Facebook, not the parent company, right? So we are telling, so our side here is telling you that when we break them down, all these companies have nowhere to link back to, and they will have to be held accountable for their actions. Now, my next argument is that basically what these massive companies could do with all their money, with all their market, and also on with their social influence, is that they can lobby with the politicians. What do I mean by that? They can lower the taxes of these companies. They can do shady things. They can do horrible things by lobbying, and they couldn't do any. And these politicians can't do anything about it because they are the main source of economy for that country, for example. they are a big part, or they are so strong in terms of fans, right? Fans support them so much. These politicians cannot break them down, and because of that, we're telling you that these big tech companies are becoming too powerful to the point that they are basically taking over politics, right? And another thing is that it could happen. It could go the other way around, where politicians could support these big tech companies and basically using these tech companies for their own advantage. Maybe censoring certain things that these countries are doing is generally incorrect. For example, if a certain country is doing something wrong, and when social media is doing its work to provide and share these things online, then maybe these big tech companies can block it off, cut it off, or censor it to make sure that these to make sure that these politicians are winning and these countries get away scot-free, even though the people are trying to speak his word. Yeah.
I think so. Big tech companies are independent of those economics of specific niches. So I don't see how that actually applies in status quo.
Okay.
I think so. These big tech companies are independent of those specific nations, so they're not probably under any specific nation. So I don't see how that actually applies in lobbying politicians in status quo.
No, it's because because even though they are under this certain nation or whatever, but at the end of the day, these companies are getting money where sometimes it's too much. Even the politicians couldn't do anything about it. Even if they try to punish these big tech companies for maybe wanting to do something, they really couldn't do it because of how much money, how much lobbying they can do. Right. That is all from me. Thank you very much. Assalamualaikum.
Just to clarify, everyone in this room can hear me if I speak at this volume?
Yes.
She, her pronouns, and I'll be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. The easy and free access to knowledge and resources should never be taken away under any circumstances. Panel, I'll be doing a few things in my speech today. Firstly, providing 3 key layers of analysis in my setup as to how our world as opposition looks like in this debate, and providing 2 main arguments on how we win today's debate. But firstly, before getting into that, I have 3 key rebuttals to the government side. Firstly, why these big tech companies want to sell data and want to sell the private data, why these big tech companies want to sell the private data in the first place. I'm going to rebut this by saying, firstly, you say that they already have enough money because of how big their influence is in the international markets and all that. Therefore, money can't be an incentive for them to sell data or sell privacy in the first place. Secondly, they would lose support and followers because if you find out Instagram is selling your data, I'm quite sure that there is a high enough incentive for you to stop using Instagram in the first place. Therefore, I don't understand why these big tech companies have any incentive to sell this data in the first place. They would lose supporters and followers. It's a harm to them. Therefore, they have no incentive to do that. Secondly, there was no mechanism, no analysis as to how you would even break it up in the first place, what legal and practical methods you would do, how you would deal with the complications that would come from breaking up these big tech companies. This was crucial setup that should have come in first. I don't think it should be credited if it comes up in second. Now, how do these independent companies, independent of any nation, affect national politics in any country? Instagram does not belong to any nation. Facebook does not belong to any nation. So I'm not so sure how it affects any local politics in any example. Now that I've finished my rebuttals, I'll be going into setup for today. Now, firstly, what actually happens when you break up the big tech companies? Firstly, it would look like these companies no longer having the funds. For example, Google now in today's world is free to search anything you want, but if it was broken up, they would need to start implementing subscriptions. So if you want to search something up online, you would have to pay a subscription and so on. In another example, Instagram in status quo is free. but in their world, once they have broken it up, it would look like having to pay money or having a monthly subscription just to post your stories, or maybe having a premium version of Instagram. Therefore, consumers that use it on a daily basis, for example, those who use Google, those who use email, those who use Facebook, those who use Instagram, will get affected, and I'll be explaining this more in my next layer. Now, how companies under these big tech companies, for example, Instagram under Meta, already have a high influence on consumers. I think that this is something we can, as on both sides, we can agree on, is that consumers already rely heavily on the big tech companies and also on smaller companies under these big tech companies. Now, why these consumers? These consumers are a key stakeholder, and they already have a heavy reliance on these companies under the big tech. For example, again, Googling every day, emails, Play Store, apps, calendars, and schedules, and so on. So when you already have this high reliance, it looks like when you break it up in your world, you're essentially taking away this reliance, and there are many legal and practical complications that come from breaking up, because you're not just I'm going to break up these companies and that's it. There are many different there's many other more complications that come from it. There are a billion branches of these companies, and I don't understand how this even looks like, seeing as there was no analysis, no mechanism coming up from their side. Another aspect is today Google is something that you can use whenever you want, and you don't have to pay a single penny for it. And essentially today it's easy access to those from poor and middle classes that want to Google up research. For example, you have a history paper, you want to Google up research. It is free knowledge, and it's easy access to those from these poor and middle class states. In your world, where people have to pay a subscription just to Google something or a search engine, how are you going to deal with these from these poorer and middle class communities that can't afford that? They can't afford to pay $50 per month just to search for anything a search engine not accepted. Now, a preempt to opposition side. These companies already have many security and preventive measures in place. So government cannot say that it's not safe for them to have this information because they might be marketing the wrong things or might be manipulating local politics, as they already said. No incentive to do this in the first place. Big companies are rich enough, so they don't need to gain more money in the first place. So again, no incentives, no, not accepted. Please stop editing me. Now, I'll be going into our burden. Our burden today is just simply to defend status quo, and why not breaking up the big tech companies in itself is better. Now, I'll be going into my arguments. First harm, what are the harms on government's world existed? First harm is going to be the harm to consumers in itself. And the second layer of analysis to this will be the harms to those smaller companies that are under the big tech companies. For example, Instagram that's under Meta, or Facebook that's under Meta, or in the things like Google that's under Apple. Now, back to the first layer of analysis, harms to consumers. Their day-to-day reliance, emails, schedules, chats, calendars, updates, all of these they are reliant on these numbers. For example, when your Google accounts, you send emails on them and so on. What is your site going to do to handle all of these harms that are existent there? What is your site going to do to essentially combat that? Now, on the harms to smaller companies, what is your site going to do when Instagram can't even fund its own self because you've essentially broken down Meta, you've essentially broken down Alphabet? What is Google going to do then when you can't even access YouTube without having to pay a monthly subscription just to watch videos? Now, moving on into my second argument for today, the legal and practical complications not accepted. The legal and practical complications that come from this. Again, I don't even know what breaking down these companies look like, because again, no mechanism, no analysis that came up from them. Now, it isn't just as simple as breaking them down. You have to contend that there are going to be many legal and practical complications when you want to break down a company that has a million and billions of branches. Like for example, Google has Play Store, Google has Gmail, and so on. Now, these are a lot of complications that your side has to defend, and your side has to prove to us why it's worth all these legal and complications just to break down these companies in the first place. I've already taken down your argument on how it does not affect local politics, so I still don't understand why it's worth having all these legal and practical complications in the first place. Now, second layer of analysis to this argument. What would happen to these, what does legal and practical complications look like to especially these smaller companies that are under the big tech companies? They will have to find other means to support their companies. But again, as I've said already, Instagram probably having to impose subscriptions, premium accounts, and so on. They will have to find another medium of funds, and there will be so many complications that will come from just this in itself. So you're not only harming the consumers, you're not only harming the big tech companies in itself, but you're also harming these other smaller companies that you claim you defend on your side, but still no substantive as to how this is true. Alright. For all those reasons, I've never been crowded to oppose things.
I think you're on your position and right.
Beginning my speech in 3, 2, 1. It's extremely easy for opposition to somehow posit that somehow big tech companies don't want to sell data out of benevolence or just because they have quote-unquote enough capital, right? In fact, let's move on straight to clarifications, right? She was asking about whether or not we had an actual mechanism, and she talked about like the legal complications of trying to break down big tech companies, right? Two layers here. First of all, I think that as long as like the originating state, for example, the United States, where Meta has originated from, these states oftentimes have at least enough power to at least obligate that these companies at least break down into their more basic subsidiaries, right? Now, even if they want to say that it's assertive, at the end of the day, states have proven to be able to break down monopolies historically. For example, how the United States government has effectively broken down railway monopolies back in the 1800s, right? So secondly, let's move on to responses, right? They talked about how that when there's less competition when there's no capital, right? Firstly, we thought that's an unfair characterization. They're just assuming that somehow new competition just starts out from scratch. In fact, we thought that there are things like startups and etc. And the moment that they do gain footing in government, right, they'll probably steadily make more profit from that point. Secondly, that we thought that oftentimes they have to be self-sustaining and the capital resources are there to provide R&D, right? Now, even if that's not true, we do trade off the amount of capital that smaller that companies get on our side, but in the end of the day, we don't have to trade our privacy just so Apple can like implement dynamic island or whatsoever. Because we tell that if you want to really defend big companies, they don't have an incentive to innovate as long as the consumers stay happy, right? Secondly, our first speaker was talking about how why big tech wants to buy data, right? She said like they somehow have enough money. Like in the first place, corporations often are profit incentivized, right? They have the incentive to grow bigger in order to facilitate the monopoly to become bigger, right? We tell that also they run a free data model. That's to say that they have to use other means to actually gain money, right? Because they're using Instagram for free. So that's why at the end of the day, they're going to sell your data to things like state governments and corporations in order to create personalized ads for you, right? Because we tell that that's their major source of revenue. Now, secondly, he was asking us for analysis about how it affects politics, right? We know that the way that social media works is that it uses algorithms to continually feed you political ads that you want. That's to say that if you're a left-leaning person and you're being fed more left-leaning ads, you're more likely to radicalize from that point onwards, right? So we know that given this dangerous precedent, it's more like we tell you that I've already proven to you about how it majorly affects politics and social media. One good example is how Facebook essentially facilitated the January 6th attack on the Capitol. Now, secondly, their biggest push on their side was about how they're going to have a subscription model on their side, right? We tell that this entire idea of a subscription model for corporations is already self-defeating. The moment that you do break down as a corporation and become a smaller subsidiary, you're more likely to at least want to find other alternatives rather than having a subscription service. Because the moment that you do implement a subscription service, right, users are less incentivized to at least opt into your service, right? As proven by how many users eventually don't want to opt into YouTube Premium or don't want to opt into like premium subscriptions such as Reddit Premium or whatever, right? So we tell that at the end of the day, if they do really want to implement a pay system, right, it's going to gain like less traction at the end of the day. Now let's move on to my first subsidiary under the tagline of how when you dismantle monopolies, you do allow for a more diverse market, right? So what's the premise here? Given that big tech companies are the earliest and fastest growing competitors in the tech market, they oftentimes have a well-established standing in the market. So when this happens, in order to maintain this standing, they often facilitate things like monopolies. For example, they use the smaller linked subsidiaries to effectively control things like the market trajectory, right? That's to say that given this lack of competition and given that every company in your market is controlled by you, you're more likely going to raise your prices because there's virtually no competition against you. Now, thus, we tell you that when this happens, there's only two options for smaller companies entering the market. First of all, you're either choked out by big tech companies that are actively trying to choke you out of the market by giving you like disadvantage, by giving you unfair circumstances, or you are in the end you are coercively bought out by big tech by things like high money offers and etc. Right? So we tell that when that happens, happens, the impact is like twofold, right? We tell that on opposition, two things happen. On scale, we tell that the stagnancy of the tech market, will essentially affect like millions of users, right? This was like Apple refusing to innovate after models and after iteration of the iPhone, right? We tell that the moment that they feel comfortable in these monopolies, they have less incentive to innovate. So we tell that whatever kind of innovation argument that opposition wants to run has already fallen, right? Secondly, we tell that it's also especially harmful that the harms that do come with these monopolies are especially irreversible. Because we tell that our opposition, when you do have big tech monopolies, right, you trying to at least charge or trying to at least call out these monopolies is extremely hard, because the moment that you do try to do so, they're just going to go to Congress, they're going to lobby for a law or policy that actively plays in their favor, right? Because we tell that even in status quo, sure, there might have been instances where Apple was charged for things like data breaches, right? But they keep doing it because in the end, they still have the state, because in the end, with the resources that they have the backing of the state in order to continue to, sell data and do data breaches whatsoever, right? Comparatively on proposition, right, we are the only side today that's able to innovate and encourage competition by at least inviting other companies and encouraging things like new startups in the market that's just not going to be bought out by Google or Apple at the end of the day. And for monopolies, we tell that on proposition, we at least encourage a fair and free market post dismantling these monopolies, because you are able to at least go to Congress without these corporations lobbying against your charges. And before 6 NPOIs, it's pretty apparent that they have zero to no engagement whatsoever. But let's try to, since I have more time, let's try to break down the case further, right? I think that the entire case is contingent on the fact that firstly, they have to prove to us how these data breaches don't happen in the first place. The only defense that they have on their side is to tell me that, oh yeah, they have enough money. In fact, let's take them at their best and let's assume that's true, right? Why do corporations still want to continually buy out other corporations? Why does Xbox want to buy out independent studios in order to? Why does Xbox want to buy out independent studios when they already have a big enough share of the market? This essentially proves to you that no matter how big a corporation is, there is no stopping point, and there will always be further acquisitions of other companies in order to choke out competition, right? Secondly, they try to run this counterfactual that now there will be subscription services, right? I think it's pretty intuitive for us to assume that the moment that you do adopt subscription services, less people are going to be buying, because even if some individuals have that capital in the first place, they're more likely to see things. Investments such as YouTube such as a subscription for a video service is going to be a waste of money in the end, right? So in the end of the day, what's the comparative here? Without on government, we're the only side for you to prove to you as far to how truly harmful monopolies are. We already told you about how corporations have an exclusive incentive to never stop acquiring these companies and to continually sell data. And the only side to you to actually prove to you about how this harms consumers in the end, right? Comparative to our opposition, they actively didn't actually give us any kind of incentive analysis as to how somehow corporations don't want to sell off their assets or whatsoever. And they just basically run on the assertion that corporations are going to be benevolent. And with that, I am so proud to propose. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Deputy Prime Minister and President, your thoughts.
Start in 3, 2. So the biggest push from side for today's debate has been 1, security, and 2, data being sold. So I tell you that data in itself is a very big market in today's world, and it's very prevalent in the first place. And when there is demand, there will always be supply from someone, and that cannot be denied. And so I tell you that small companies are even more likely to be incentivized to actually sell off the data of whatever consumers give them, because eventually there will be some data that consumers give to these companies in the first place. No matter big or small, they will get some sort of data. And small companies are more incentivized because now small companies have lacking funds in the first place, because now that they are broken down, they do not have a set structure in system where they can actually have the specific funding to maybe solve a few issues. So they are more incentivized to actually sell off this data in the first place, because now they get a source of income from this data that they would not have, and they are lacking funds in the first place. So they are more incentivized to actually sell off this data. So done with that, moving on to points. First, innovates and builds up other companies. So 3 layers to this step. First, on how companies innovate as a whole. Second, on how having big companies having big companies incentivizes global competitiveness, and lastly on how it's more convenient for the user in the first place. So the key factor for innovation in the first place is two things: research and development and competitiveness. And what essentially happens on Prop's world is that both of these gets blown out of the water, which I'll explain more in my second layer. For a big company like Google to actually make Google the search engine in the first place that everyone uses and that everyone finds the most convenient in today's world better, they need funds. They need actual funds to actually develop the actual search engine and make it better in the long run, because the needs and the demands of consumers increase every day, and so they have to continuously make it better. So the reason they have the funds to make that specific search engine better, for example, if taking Google, the reason they have the funds that they can actually make this thing better is because they are a big company. If they were not a big company, what would actually happen? If they were not a big company, they would not have the funds that actually that can be actually allocated for the research and development part in the first place. And they can the only reason why they can operate sustainably is because they have the needs and the funds to actually do so in the first place. So if you were to break up this parent company, these big companies, then what funds would they have to make their sources better, to make their services better? What source of funds would they have? And even if they did have some sort of fund, would it be enough to properly dedicate it towards research and development in the first place to actually make this thing better? Now, it creates two problems for the company one and the consumers two. So one, the consumers get worse off facilities. Imagine a world where Instagram has bugs and lags every 5 minutes. This is a world that you will be subjecting the average consumer to in ops world, because now the company doesn't have enough money to fix this issue, and even if it did, it's going to other places that is more important than the issue in the first place. And to solve a specific issue, it's going to take much more longer than what would actually take if it was a big company in the first place. But second, in a world where consumers rage if Instagram doesn't work for an hour, what do you think will happen if it goes on for days? The company's shares will plummet to all-time low, and it will make it worse for the companies, eventually dilapidating it, because now it's a small company. Second layer then, on how having big companies incentivizes competition in the first place. So when two big companies exist, then they will most definitely compete to gain the consumer's attention in the first place. An example of this, to prove to cite Prop, would be like Pixar and Disney competing to make better movies, because they know people on the ground actually value them for their movies. They know people on the ground actually compare them. It's a competition between both of them to see who makes the better movie. And if it was broken up, and let's say the movies that Pixar made was terrible, people on the ground would obviously cite Disney in the first place, and Disney would be much more incentivized to get more higher profit levels. So this would incentivize Pixar in the first place to make better movies, and this creates a healthy competition between both companies that are big to actually make out better movies and facilitate the people on the ground as a whole. But if it was broken up in the first place, then they wouldn't have enough funds to actually make a good movie. Even considering on their best case, where they do have competition between small companies, which is what they've been saying time and time again, it is very marginal and will exist on a very superficial level. Painting you a picture, if you have money, if you have many small companies and all of them have a budget of maybe like around $200,000 to make the movie, and even if there's super intense competition among like 200 small companies making one movie, the budget of the movie is still $200,000. As opposed to two big companies doing it, even if there's only two big companies doing it, the budget of the movie is going to be around $5 or $6 million, which will then incentivize the company to make much more quality movies, which will actually create, which will actually create that competition that big companies need to compete on a much higher level, bringing more qualities, which is better for the average consumer as well. Yes.
So you're telling me it's nicer to have high quality Pixar movies at the cost of giving corporations the power to literally change political climates?
The thing is, the main goal of every corporate big company is they are incentivized towards profit. More likely than not, politics is not going to be their main concern, nor is it going to be changing the political climate. Even if they do, it's on a very small scale, and the majority of them, as opposed to having small companies on your world, it impacts the consumers on the ground on a much higher level, which makes them worse off in the first place, and we are willing to trade that off. So, if I were to way over side Prop in today's debate, we from way over Prop in long-term sustainability 1 and convenience for the people 2. So, we take long-term sustainability because of the simple fact that big companies have enough funding, which their world props world would not have in the first place, because small companies are very likely to not bloom at all. They may paint you a very rainbow and roses picture where small companies may start from scratch and they will eventually become big, but more likely than not, that is not what is going to happen. They're going to have less funding, they're going to bring out worse qualities of their services that they are providing to the consumers, and eventually they will lose people's support and they will eventually dilapidate. And this is what that does not happen on our world, because the companies have enough funding to actually make the services that they are providing good in the first place, thus winning the people's support and eventually creating a bigger market for them in the first place. But second, then on convenience, if you see apps like Google, what do they have all in common? Google, Gmail, maybe YouTube, Calendar, they all work on a simple basis where it's all linked to a single Google account. So when you break up these companies, then it's going to have multiple different strategies or different accounts that you have to do to make it actually work. Like maybe you have a different account on YouTube, you have a different account on Twitter, you have a different account on every other platform. So this makes it less convenient for the consumer in the first place, thus more affecting or more making it a harm in the long run for the consumers in the first place. Now we're going to propose.
Thank you, DJ, for your opposition.
Right, my name is Phil. I'm Dwayne. Sorry in advance if I hear defend anyone, anyhow, anyone, anyway. I'll be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Opposition lives in a very sweet world in which they continue to live in a very huge leap of logic. Why is this? My speech will be simple. A bit of reclarification and call-outs that need to be made in this debate, a few rebuttals, and then a quick comparative between the two main clashes in this debate. First off, let's go to a few call-outs. Their side has a huge logical flaw in which for one moment they come up and tell us that these companies are profit incentivized. That is to say, they will do anything in status quo to want to get profits in the first place. But then they come up and tell us that somehow they're going to break up these companies. When these companies are going to be break up, they're going to create subscriptions. We tell you this is kind of illogical in a sense because these companies want their profits. That is to say, in which now continue to create these subscriptions, in which you now have users who want free alternatives, they're going to run away from those states. But even if you still don't buy this, we tell you comparatively we're better. But I'll get to this comparative later on in my speech. Second of all, we tell you that just because people are likely to screw over these companies, just because we're likely to screw over these companies, right? At the end of the day, at the very least, we tell you there are other resources of revenues for these companies like ads and so on. So it's more likely for these larger companies, once they've broken up, to continue to gain profit through those ways, rather than creating subscriptions, continuing to lose the users that they currently have, who are more likely to go to these smaller companies in the market. Continuing. Going to a few responses. First off, they come up to us and push the huge illogical claim to us that somehow we're going to screw over these small companies once we break up those large companies. Two responses here. First off, we tell you the fact is it's way different than that. Currently, in status quo where these big companies are monopolizing over the market, these small companies are quite literally being drawn in the market. That is to say, any form of new ideas or new innovation is never really going to be let out in the market. Why is this? The fact is you see companies like Apple or Samsung actively buying out other companies or smaller companies, not allowing them to give better quality things. Even if they do give out better things or better options, we tell you users are less likely to buy into it. Why? Because they are monopolizing the market, meaning to say they can cause things like price inflations, making sure that these companies cannot fight or survive in the market in the first place. That's what their world looks like. Our world looks like in which we make sure that these larger companies or these parent companies, in which we've broken up their power, in which they do not have the power to continue to monopolize the market, to inflate certain prices, and also cause lobby policies which are better for them to continue to monopolize the market. We tell you this is mitigated. Second response, in which we tell you that only on their side are these small companies screw over. Take in this conversation. On our side, we tell you, even at the end of the day, these companies still are incentivized to want to hold on to that very few users they are. What does this mean? We tell you that at the end of the day, these small companies
have the incentive to want to get into find the market for the sole reason that they want to hold on to the very few users that they have. This is only achievable on our side because they continue to want to give quality like products or things to continue gain or gather or hold on to the spot, very few support that they have. We tell you this is exclusive solely to our side, in which their side it doesn't really materialize for the sole reason that these big companies will never allow that to happen, in which they want to completely monopolize the market solely for themselves, continue to gather all the profit. But before I continue, sure.
Yeah. So don't you think big companies buying out smaller companies is better than smaller companies trying to bloom on their own and eventually failing and getting nothing in the first place?
We tell you this doesn't really make sense. The fact is, on their side, this happens for the sole reason that these big companies are going to continue to drown these smaller companies because they don't want any form of competition in the market. That is to say, only on our side in which these big companies don't have that lobbying power or don't have the power to continue to manipulate the market and the way it flows or manipulate price changes, only then can these small companies not fail or at the very least give quality products towards their users and hold on to the very few users they have. For that reason alone, their claim already falls. Second of all, they continue to push on to us the claim that apparently these like smaller companies can continue to live under the small companies. Sure, we take the trade-off. Even if at the end of the day you say that your market is going to continue to thrive better or these big companies are better for profits and even for these small companies, at the end of the day, we'd rather have a flagship platform in which these companies are quote-unquote going to be screwed over. At the very least, we don't have these companies continue to lobby policies or politicians to continue to make unfair policies, making it impossible for smaller companies to continue to thrive, making it impossible for them to have a shot at the market in the first place. But before I continue with my comparative, I don't know if your eyes. They completely agree. Moving on to comparatives. First clash in this debate. Why we tell you that it's too dangerous for these large companies to become too OP or for the boomers out there overpowered. First off, we tell you the main issue with this is like, for example, the issue with accountability towards these companies and how we're going to like stop them from continuing to like pushing these policies. First off, what is the comparative here? Their side has given us no substantive as to how they're going to mitigate the fact or like mitigate issues like market manipulation, somehow helping the smaller companies continue to try or have a shot in the first place. How they're going to ensure that these policies are not going to be pushed or not going to be lobbied by these politicians. Comparably on our side, we tell you otherwise. We tell you the influence that these like large companies have over politicians is far detrimental, especially in which they're going to continue to lobby policies or make policies catered solely towards these big companies, continuing to destroy the market and smaller companies, making sure there's no competition whatsoever. That's why in status quo you see companies like Apple and Samsung continue to dominate, and then you have the smaller phone companies not being able to thrive at all whatsoever. Second of all, we tell you that then there's going to be on their world, there's going to be policies that are made for their convenience. It's like a tax manipulation, letting these companies get away with like shady stuff or like illegal stuff to a certain extent. This looks like Facebook continuing to steal information from users. This looks like Facebook continue to steal information from users without there being anything to stop them and to a certain extent. Why is this? We tell you the fact is accountability isn't going to be pushed directly to that. Why is this? The fact is, although we continue to attack like the company Facebook itself, we tell you the parent company which is Meta doesn't really get the backlash. And when that happens, we see continuously happening because they can get away with it freely due to them having the power to continue to lobby these policies and also manipulate the market, causing them to get away scot-free with these things. Second clash about monopoly. We tell you on their world, it looks like they tell us that they're going to create more like quote-unquote healthy competition. We tell you this doesn't really make sense because these companies do not have a shot at the competition at all because it's already been completely dominated by these large companies. And then they try to tell us that we're going to create subscriptions and whatnot. First off, we already proven to you that this doesn't make sense because these companies are profit incentivized and you don't want to lose those few users that already have. Comparably, on us, like which we now have a more diverse market, we allow these things like we make sure there's no prices or no trends being manipulated by these large companies. For all those reasons, never be proud or oppose, go for side. Done. Thank you.
Am I audible? Start in 3, 2, 1.
Just like how the global politics, they need a centralized system, we believe that in technology, we need the same as well. In order for this to happen, side is off. But first that, I think so the main stakeholder here that Gauss fails to perceive in this debate is what actually happens towards the consumers on its own. Because these consumers note that these consumers are the main contributing factor of the success of these companies in the first place. And they are the largest stakeholder that is affected if these companies go to be changed in some sort of way. Yes, we do believe that in some ways, companies of these specific companies are still very judgmental on the sides of the houses either way, but we believe that the largest stakeholder that you should defend in this today's debate is basically the welfare of the consumers on its own, on how they will actually use these specific services now, there and then. On their side, it's worse. We prove to you that we already considered from first that these specific things will happen on opposition. Like monopolies, yes, they will apparently still happen, but we tell you why this trade-off that we will take. And because in the exchange of competition, in the exchange of better economy, in the exchange of the better welfare of these specific consumers, and also in exchange of these future innovations that improves on these specific little companies, we tell you that we do it better on all. And I don't see how they get all of this on Gulf, because the problem then and their entire paradigm then becomes, number one, a huge pool of startup companies who have no profit, no capital to start off with, so all of them just fail in the first place. And number two, they screw over all of the consumers. That happens that they screw over all of the consumers that are already pre-existing in the first place. So on the top of my speech, what strategy and observations that I'd like to point out towards opposition is that the failed setup on this specific debate. How would they break up these companies that never has been told throughout all these 2 matches? Asia already proves to you that by breaking up these big companies comes with very big legal implications that you now have to solve on your side of the house, because of the fact that now many companies are now interlocked with one another. Then switching between platforms is now harder on your side of the house because of the fact that consumers can't really interlock between them because they're no longer a part of that specific big company. So in that specific scenario, you have not even engaged with us on our specific case on how this goes off on your side of the house. So please come up with a alternative on how this is actually going to be solved better on your side of the house, where we tell you that we already have a specific centralized power or this so-called in this tech industry, which already is status quo and it's already doing fine as it is. We're then moving on to clashes instead. 4 clashes I have to this debate. Number 1, who gets better innovation towards these specific companies? Number 2, who is better for the consumers as a whole? And I feel like this is the most important clash in this debate. Number 3, who gets better economies or lobbying or whatever? Who gets better economies in general or power? And 4, who gets better competition? Firstly then, on who gets better innovation. They claim that our side will not have innovation because people will now be very happy with the specific giant big tech company that's already in place, and these companies will no longer have the incentive to actually innovate in the first place. When we tell you that is completely wrong on their side of it, but that's completely wrong for them to actually assume on their side of the house, because of the fact that now you have more people buying into those specific products, because of the fact that you're in the specific big companies, you're now more likely to actually improve and innovate just because of the fact that more people are now buying in. When you innovate, then you have more customers going in and going on to subscribe to your products as a whole. So I don't see how this is actually logically linked on their side of the house when they automatically believe that, since that I have a large amount of following, I will stop innovating and stop improving my product for the fact that I already have enough money. So let's say I don't really have that specific incentive to actually innovate, therefore I will not innovate because I'm in a big company. Yes.
Our question is simple. We said that these companies it's not that they don't want to innovate because they don't have the incentive. The issue is these big companies are quietly running their market, making sure there's no new ideas. Please clarify, please don't misunderstand.
The fact that you already have this sort of innovations already in place in status quo proves to you that everything that you're claiming on your side of the house already does not already stand in the first place. We've already proven to you on how in status quo, innovations are still more likely to happen on outside of the house because of the fact that number 1, smaller companies now have a bigger capital to actually work out of, to actually innovate their specific ideas and products towards these specific larger big tech companies. This is again not yet responded towards Gov, not yet responded by Gov. Second clash then on who actually works better for the welfare of the consumers. What they have failed to prove into this debate is how this will actually negatively affect consumers on their side of the house. What this looks like limited features and access towards their specific services in specific companies. This looks like what Asha already put to you in the speech, subscription models, where they say it's uncharitable in the first place because more likely a lot of these companies would opt for other things to actually improve their profit, because now when they see ads, they see subscriptions, they're now more likely to opt out of it. We tell you that that's completely wrong for them to assume on their side of the house because of the fact that now if you are having to resort to these subscription products, all of the fact all of the things that you already have claimed on your side would eventually be like mellowed down and also not even impactful in the first place. Secondly, on the security, they give a large chunk of their case is about on our side of the house, security concerns is the basic issues, and the only example that they give for this is algorithms. We tell you that algorithms is basically based on how much you watch on TikTok. If I watch football videos on TikTok, then I'll of course be given more football videos on TikTok. I don't see how that's actually a direct violation towards your own specific security. No further analysis for that point on their side of the house. Secondly, what we prove to you on OP is that when we innovate these specific things, like I already told you in my first flash, when we get more innovation on our side of the house, it just causes a trickle-down effect where it's not better for the consumers. Consumers have now more like specific like features that they can use in specific apps, which then again is inherently much more better off for consumers. Third flash then on economies. Their largest goals on that is like how monopolies are like lobbying politicians, right? How politicians have these specific monopolies on these specific the big tech companies. Let me tell you that first of all, politicians are already lobbying everywhere. So I don't see how that actually applies on this specific motion where they can already have like campaigns that they can do so. But the second of all, it's already in the duty of an average reasonable voter to see what policies are right in the first place, right? So I don't see how this actually goes off on your side. But let's take them at their best. How is it better then? On your, like you still have politicians lobbying every single, like most of the largest platform that politicians lobby on is like global campaigns where they actually promote stuff towards like their specific neighborhood because of the proximity that they have in specific lobbying places. So I don't see though how it's better on their side of the house. What we are able to prove to you on OP is that we have a large enough capital to actually get you up and running on the stakeholders that you try to defend, which is like small startup companies. And we also tell you that we have other clashes that we have already said before that they are able to manifest these specific problems in the first place. Lastly then on competition. What happens on OP, what they claim that happens on OP is that there will be no competition because like everyone's under this specific big tech, right? Where we tell you, on your side of the house, no competition happens because of the fact that you don't even have capital to work all big in the first place. Even if we take them at their best, let's say that competition still happens. We tell you competition happen better on our side because of the fact that you are now under these big tech companies which are more proximate that you can actually like have this specific internal competition between, and all of this actually leads to better off innovation and other questions that I've told you. With all of these reasons, sign off. Thank you.
Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Panel, there'll be a few things I'll be doing in my speech today. Firstly, two main clashes that came up from this debate and how we have won on both of them. Now, first clash today. Which side harms the consumers more? Their side. They have taken away the most basic day-to-day apps that consumers use and have provided no other alternative as to how what these consumers are going to turn to when their basic means of sending emails, basic means of sending chats, and basic means of checking their calendar have been taken away. Not only that, but on their side, small companies are, okay, I'll be explaining that more in a second. Now, we're not saying that breaking up the big tech companies in itself is not something that is able to happen. We're just asking you to portray what breaking up these companies actually look like. How would you break it up? What's your mechanism? What's your analysis? Would you ban them? How would you make them smaller? How would you break them up from the big tech? Again, no analysis. All throughout 3 speakers, nothing came up on that. Now, if you want to say that when they break up these big companies and when they are forced to do subscriptions to get some amount of funding on your side, people would, instead of paying the subscription, they would just find another app. Now, 2 things on this. Firstly, if everyone can't use YouTube anymore, or everyone can't use Google anymore, and they have to find another video streaming platform or search engine, wouldn't that other video streaming engine become the next big tech? Again, no analysis from your side and no engagement from your side. Now, moving on. You say that companies are profit incentivized and that they want to make more money and therefore that's the reason that you gave as to why they sell data and why they sell things like privacy and all that stuff. But then you say like that companies like Apple will stop innovating and stop making more iPhones, so innovation stops on our side. even though it would actually make them more money. So if they are profit incentivized, I think it's far more likely that they will continue innovating to make more money in itself. Why do you keep contradicting yourself on this part? Now, we flipped their argument on selling data in the first place. They claim that on our side, these big tech companies sells data, but then on your side, when these big tech companies are broken up, when they don't have enough funds anymore, wouldn't they be more incentivized to sell data then? Wouldn't these smaller and bigger companies like Instagram and Facebook, when they no longer have the funds that they have now in our world, wouldn't they be more incentivized to sell data and sell privacy on your side? For example, Meta broken up, so Instagram is again forced to sell data. Therefore, I believe on this argument we win as well. And it's when selling data and the aspect of selling privacy is something that is more prevalent on your side. Now, let's talk about the political climate clash. They never proved how on earth big companies somehow affect political climates, but when you break down these companies into smaller companies, there's no effect on political climates anymore. I don't understand this coming up, but firstly, these companies are independent, as we have explained all throughout three speakers. They do not belong to any nation. They do not belong to any country or state. They are independent of themselves. Instagram only belongs to Instagram or maybe its parent company, but it does not belong to a country like Malaysia or Singapore and so on. Secondly, the example they gave was that politicians can pay these big companies so they can push ads about these politicians to consumers. This was the justification they gave on this argument. But panel, I don't think anyone is going to vote for someone just after seeing one or two ads about this politician. I don't think this is enough justification to prove why someone would vote for that politician in the first place. Therefore, I don't think they win on the political climate clash either. Now, moving on, panel. What didn't they do throughout their case that ultimately gave us the win today? Firstly, they never handled our argument on how when big tech companies break up and then don't have enough money and then they have to do subscriptions, that those from the poorer and middle class can't access those subscriptions. They can't afford to pay for this, so they lose out on ever getting to use Google or Instagram again. This harm still exists on their side. Secondly, no mechanism, no analysis on what breaking up even looks like again. I'm the last speaker from my side, and still there's no analysis and no engagement with that. Thirdly, they never proved how they handle the legal and practical complications that is going to happen when you break up the big tech. I've said it in my speech, my whip has said it in his speech, and we have already proved why these complications happen in the first place and why on your side, and why it's so inherently harmful to not only the consumers but to these smaller companies in itself. You never handle this and no mechanism coming out from your side on this. Now, panel, if you agree with all the reasons I've never, please side with side of opposition.
I thank the opposition last speaker to allow the set to come to this time.
Beginning my speech in 3, 2, 1. I think the gist of the case was immediately obvious the moment I gave the POI to second. I asked whether or not they would rather trade off things like better Pixar movies at the cost of self-privacy and the privacy and the autonomy of millions of individuals who use these social media companies. And he said yes. So we know that by that response alone, they already lose the debate, right? Moving on to more strategic call-outs, right? I think there's a lot of strawmanning on their side, given that they're trying to push to us this case or this burden where in our world somehow you have to break down platforms like Twitter or Instagram, right? We know that at the end of the day, we're only breaking up the subsidiaries that make up these companies and operate these companies, because at the end of the day, yes, we do agree that maybe subscription models or algorithms will change with these platforms, but they will still fundamentally exist. Secondly, we tell you that there's a bunch of assertions as well. But secondly, we tell that Op themselves already traded off literal better quality of life in your social media experience at the cost of things like being manipulated by social media, being radicalized by social media, and just in general having your data sold, right? We tell that at the end of the day, this trade-off already loses them the debate. Thirdly, we also tell you that they also lock themselves out of the debate by running a low impact case, right? Because by summary, the entire impact of their debate is just trying to offer better services while trying to mitigate the harms of like corporations, right? We know that even if this does succeed and we do directly, in their best case, that we do directly weigh both impacts, right? In the end of the day, the impact of having a bigger, larger than a state actor trying to manipulate politics and trying to sell data is still a much more bigger impact than maintaining status quo and having my favorite Instagram page or whatsoever. Thirdly, also thought there's a lot of material came out with Quick and Reply especially, right? Because suddenly they post to us the question only in reply that they suddenly ask us like, what happens to the next big corporation, right? We thought that even if you wanted to consider that, it's already too late in the debate to actually, make sense or weigh in the debate, right? So now let's move on to weighing. Three metrics for weighing, right? First of all, accountability. I think from the get-go, it's already been our clash that accountability will be won on our side, right? Our entire push has been about resources and the ability to lobby by these corporations, right? Comparatively, the only kind of wonky defense that they've really given our opposition was to tell to us like, oh, now that they're small corporations, right, they're going to sell data, they're not going to sell data, right? The critical difference here is the difference in resource. We thought that when big corporations lobby, they can be held accountable because they can mobilize resources in order to manipulate Congress and the state, in order to manipulate Congress, in order to play into their advantage. Comparatively, when small companies try to sell data, they're going to be immediately called out and they don't have the manipulative resources in order to change the fundamental decision of the court or to change the fundamental, policy of the state, right? Secondly, on quality, right? I think this one we've already traded off from the start, right? I think we already taken the downfall of having some comparatively lesser amount of quality in social media in order to access things like better privacy and etc. Right? So even if they do win this clash of quality, in the end of the day, because there's a low impact clash, it doesn't really matter in this debate, right? Now before I move to the third clash, actually I want to qualify everything about consumers, right? I think on our side it's been pretty prevalent since they've asked us to clarify about the biggest stakeholder in the debate as the consumers. I think we still win on this clash due to the fact that sure, people do access lesser services, but at the end of the day, at least they don't have that privacy breach, nor do they have themselves become radicalized by social media, right? I think that finally regarding the clash of competition, right? I think competition is another clash still won by government, given the fact we've told to you about competition is already locked out, given the existence of monopolies and etc. Right? The only contention from opposition, from first to reply, was to tell to us that somehow now you don't have money, right? I think by their own premise of if small companies cannot thrive without money, then we have to assume that every corporation in history somehow cannot thrive because it has to have a starting point. And sure, we take the downfall that many startups are going to go bankrupt in the process, but that's just the market. Because in the end of the day, some will succeed and some will die, but at least the existence of competition is still thriving, etc. Right? We told you at the end of the day, due to these reasons, we are so proud to propose. Thank you very much.